Okay, good evening, everybody. I'd like to start by welcoming everyone to the meeting. A quick reminder that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed. I will take all reports as read this evening. If officers attending would like to add anything or give a brief update, please feel free. Otherwise, I will move to questions. Item 1, apologies for absence. We've had Caroline Bruce give her apologies, and I believe Donna is here, or we have a substitute for her. So, no, they're looking around. Maybe online. Maybe she's coming. Item 2, declarations of pecuniary interest. Nothing. No, good. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting. I'll ask if panel members can say they're a true record, but just before I do, there's one thing. Councillor Page did ask for it to be noted. He asked for some, which the executive directors commented there, for some work to be added to the work programme. So that will be reported next time, Councillor Page. Thank you.
Sorry, Ed, it wasn't for the work programme. It was just to have a table showing the movement in reserves. If we could just have that circulated sometime after the meeting, that would be great.
Yeah, Asad's got it. Thank you. Okay, so can I just take the minutes agreed? Yes, thank you. Right, item 4, budget and business planning. And I'd like to ask the Cabinet Member for Finance, Councillor Alan British, to start us off, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you to all councillors for being here tonight and for all the work they've done in the run-up to this second round of budget scrutiny. Only a few councillors do that. Most councillors don't do 2 rounds. We're very pleased and delighted to be in a position to do 2 rounds. It's tradition here within the borough. I'm delighted that the leader is here as well today with us, and Cabinet Member Andrew Judge. Councillor Andrew Judge is also here. What I just wanted to say was very general, that we always have an ambition here in the Merton Council to set a balanced budget year after year after year, proving that we can be trusted to spend taxpayers' money wisely whilst protecting frontline services. And we are committed to delivering better services in each administration. Now, what we have tonight is the largest portfolio of savings we've brought forward in any budget round for this very administration, led by Councillor Ross Garrett, and my Director of Finance, Asad, will go through those figures. And we're proud that these savings are sustainable, and they will be made without having to close children's services, reduce hours at libraries, or cut back on maintenance of our parks. We're also making these savings without having to roll back the innovative work we're doing from building the first council homes in a generation, with thanks to Councillor Judge and Jeremy Smalley, to running more pop-up tips and offering free swimming for youngsters and our elderly population. And we're confident that we will close the gap. I know there are always questions about how confident we are, but we are confident, and we want to continue to be good with taxpayers' money. We want to be business-like and to build on the success of the sale of a council-owned company like Chas that's released monies for the benefit of our residents. I'll hand over to Asad now.
Thank you, Chair. So this is, as Councillor Alan British said, this is the second round of 2 windows at scrutiny, commenting on budget proposals. This is the final of 4 sessions held so far. So today the report is the update on the MTFS. So you previously scrutinised over £7 million of saving in November's scrutiny, and tonight there's a further £1.3 million to discuss, giving a total of £8.3 million. So taking all of this into account, this leaves a further £1.744 million to find for February Budget Council. So the provisional local government finance settlement landed on the 17th of December 2025. This is the first multi-year settlement in over a decade, running from 2026 to 2029. So there have been many changes to the way the settlement is presented due to the Fair Funding Review, reset of business rates, consolidation of grants, and other changes. So the Fair Funding Review has resulted in some major changes to local authority grant shares, both positively and negatively. Based on the review, Merton comes out relatively as a low needs authority, but also highly resourced, and the settlement for us does reflect that fact. So the plans around the settlement include the fair funding allocation for each council, which is comprised of the revenue support grant, the local authority better care grant, and our baseline funding levels of business rates, as well as outlining the wider changes to the retention system and consolidations of many forms of grant funding. So on Fair Funding 2.0, the Council states that the Fair Funding Review will better align funding need across the country, updating for the first time decades-old formulas used to calculate local authorities' need for services relative to one another, as well as updating assessment of needs in terms of acting as an equaliser for locally raised taxation. So the report is based on the most up-to-date information available up to the publication of the provisional settlement. However, the final budget report to Cabinet in February and to full Council will be based on the final local government finance settlement, which is also expected to include some announcements around send funding. The final settlement hasn't been published yet. We're expecting that possibly at the beginning of next week. So the figures included in the report are based on these provisional figures and our analysis of an extremely complex and far-reaching change to the way the settlement is presented for local authorities and how it's calculated and the funding distributed. It is more complex than previous years, and all of this analysis has been required throughout December and January and up to the final settlement to give us the final picture. So these are draft figures in the report that you're seeing today, but we will confirm the final figures once we get the final settlement and they are published ahead of full council. As I mentioned earlier, the end of the statutory override in 27-28 is quite significant for lots of local authorities, including Merton, and that will be a material addition to the settlement. So until that final settlement is done, we will continue on evaluating the implications over the medium term. And just to remind colleagues as well, financial pressures, especially around social care, temporary accommodation and wider DSG is still acute for us and is replicated across London and nationally. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Asad. And I was going to ask if there any news on the final settlement. So hopefully we will get that next week. Right. Can I invite panel members if they have any questions? Councillor Manley first, then Councillor Akiju.
Thank you very much for your report and the hard work that goes into it. How has the continuing dip in inflation affected the innovation change in financial digital directorates?
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. So obviously from a general council level, we do review the levels of inflation and we are pleased to see that it has reduced from a peak a number of years ago. That obviously is something we build in our forecast. So we have 3% built in next year. So that gives us the opportunity to use less of our funding to put forward for inflationary funding across the local authority. So our two departments do benefit from a lower impact on inflation in terms of the cost of our services, but the council overall has to allocate less than it has done previously where inflation has been higher.
I was going to ask about the final settlement, which you've explained, but I just want to know that we are reassured that it will be next week.
As with Treasury, these are all based on rumours, so we are expecting it next Monday. It could be earlier, but from what I hear, it's going to be next Monday.
Yes, sir.
Yes, then.
Even with the second round of savings, there's still a bit of a gap. So how confident are we that the gap will be closed before budget council?
Thank you, Councillor. So as I mentioned earlier, we put a significant amount of savings forward already. And Merton has a very, very strong track record of putting forward savings that are deliverable. You'll see in the period 8 report that also went to Cabinet in January, our savings are up to 89% as at period 8, and we expect that to hopefully improve by year end. Savings that aren't delivered in year are normally delivered virtually in full the year after. So on the back of a strong track record and the work we've been doing from December and January, we are comfortable that the advanced planning on those remaining savings that will be put forward as part of Budget Council are deliverable and will match the gap.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Any other questions from the panel? Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. So we're 1.7 million down in this year. Obviously much larger, scary sums in subsequent years, going up to 20 plus in year 4. What I wanted to ask first of all was, clearly you might have to make some further savings in order to cover that. How are we going to scrutinise those, Chair? You can't do scrutiny in a budget council. That's not the forum for that. So how are we going to scrutinise anything they come up with to close the gap?
So obviously the reports are published for cabinet and then for full council. Full council is ultimately the ultimate form of scrutiny for savings and for the budget in general. And obviously members can ask questions in those forums. And as I say, majority of savings have gone through the process, but full council is ultimately the arbiter of scrutiny on savings and the budget.
Well, Councillor Oliver's coming up with a supplementary.
Well, I just wondered, Chair, if you're satisfied with that.
Well, I think in my experience, there's always the future years always look a little bit scary.
I'm talking about the current year.
On the current year, well, I think we're in a better position than a lot of other surrounding councils. Maybe the cabinet member would like to.
No, I'm talking about scrutiny.
The scrutiny of it. It's gone through the process. Yes, I am.
Yes, I think Councillor Oliver seems to have just glossed over the fact that we hold 2 rounds of scrutiny here in the London Borough of Merton, and that gives plenty of opportunity. But the full council is where it is at, where it matters, where all councillors from whatever party have the opportunity to ask questions, to scrutinise, to query, to place amendments, to place motions. So there will be plenty of opportunity. And as you know, full council goes on from 7:15 till 10 p.m. That's nearly 3 hours where you can question us fully.
And I think the other thing is we do have the financial monitoring task group, of which you're chairing. That's where we do the real scrutiny before it comes here, before it goes to council. Yep.
Okay. Well, I just would like to register my feeling that I don't think that represents an adequate opportunity to scrutinise. Of course, there are 2 rounds of scrutiny, but we normally expect to see a balanced budget by now. I don't think in any of the other years I've been here, we've been presented with an unbalanced budget at this stage in the process. There may be reasons for that. I'm not saying that anyone's at fault. I'm just saying as it happens, we're not presented with the finished article here, so we're not in a position to scrutinise it properly here. You could come up with some completely unacceptable or saving to balance that, and we have you can't really argue that at a budget council you have an opportunity to scrutinise the detail of anything. That's not the way it works.
Well, we have got, it is a moving target, Councillor. That's the thing. We know temporary accommodation is a problem. Homelessness, these are, figures that have gone up through the roof year on year, especially lately. I think Councillor Judge wants to just come in on that.
I was just going to comment that actually Budget Council is the one area where one council meeting of the year where there is intense scrutiny. And the director is there and can be asked questions by anyone in full council and answer them. So there will be a full opportunity, and Merton Council is not in the business of preferring unbalanced budgets.
Thank you. Councillor Butcher, then Councillor Rees.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just wanted to ask how a single team will better manage increasing demand from freedom of informations and SARs.
So I think I think every council is seeing a huge increase in freedom of information requests and SARs, and that's not least because ChatGPT now offers people the option. Would you like me to turn that into an FOI request for you? So lots of people are taking them up on that. So we have seen a big increase in that. We have also got much better as a council over the last few years at turning those around in time. It's always a struggle for any local authority, quite often because the information we're asked for is very detailed. But what we are doing, and actually under Sharon's leadership, is we are reshaping that team, information governance and complaints, to bring them into one single streamlined service, which I think will have a positive impact on our ability to keep on top of that volume.
Thanks. Councillor Rees.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to just try and clarify the position with respect to the fair funding review and its impact on us. So, I mean, 40% of our money is coming grant funded from central government. When we last met in November, the LGA estimate was for a 300,000 cut for 26-27. We now know it's 2.4 million. That builds up to, in 2028-29, our assumption in November was a 7.6 million deficit. We now know that's going to be 13.4 million deficit. These are huge figures. That means that over a 3-year period, it's going to be 23.6 million across the 3 years. 23.6 million pounds being missed out on because of the fair funding review. So leaving us with what you might call a substantial black hole, to use one of Labour's favourite phrases. Now, so just to focus on the position now, we only expected a reduction of 300,000. We now know it's 2.4 million for next year. What are the services that are being cut or the charges that are being increased since that last meeting in November?
Just some clarification on the figures. So the decrease in fair funding allocation is 2.2 million for next year, rising to 13.4 million at the end of that period. And the other figure you mentioned, I think it's 24 million. I don't recognise that, but if you incorporate the fair funding loss with general look at our assumptions, the forecast is for £22 million overall budget gap by the end of 29-30, and that's cumulative. So what I'd say is, and sorry, another clarification, the estimates were done by London councils based on the limited information that was published. The detail was published, the methodology, and all the underlying formulas were published as part of the final settlement, which were the provisional settlement, which were impossible to forecast. So that was the clarity that came through the provisional settlement. In terms of the fees and charges, obviously there is detail in the cabinet report that went in December, and some of those are obviously incorporated into some of the savings that have already been put forward. So I won't go through them all, but they're published as part of that report, and some of the savings are incorporated into the savings that have been put forward in the 2 rounds.
Councillor Page.
That's right. Yes, I had a question on some of the specific savings in the report. There were a couple, actually. The first one I wanted to start with was the savings around receiving Section 117 aftercare, where it's quite a substantial saving plan for next year. And this is basically cutting the amount spent on support for people released under the Mental Health Act 1983. And doing it in a more targeted fashion. I wanted to understand what modelling had taken place to understand whether this could actually, lead to increased costs, because these are very vulnerable people by the nature of the fact that they've been under the care of the Mental Health Act, and that the support they're currently receiving is around things like housing, healthcare, or social support. If you withdraw that, you might actually end up with a sort of a cost spiral of them needing a lot of additional support, a lot of additional cost borne by the council, to help them and support them. So what modelling has been done to ensure that £435,000 cut is sustainable, and also those people will still receive appropriate help in that very critical stage when they're coming out of formal healthcare.
We'll ask the cabinet members.
Yeah, I'm going to ask John to come in. I just wanted to make the point that we do have 2 rounds of scrutiny in this borough, and we have gone through Section 117. John has explained the modelling, but I have no objections to Mr. Page listening in again on the same answer.
The first thing is the saving proposed around Section 117 is not about removing care from people. I mean, Section 117 is a statutory duty under the Mental Health Act. It is a joint responsibility for the ICB and the local authority. This is not a single responsibility, it is a joint responsibility. As I explained in the scrutiny last week, often, and in November, often people become Section 117, and because of the joint nature of the work, the reviews don't get completed to make sure that they still have the need for Section 117. In this proposal focuses on working together with our health colleagues to review people, to make sure that they have got the support that they need, and to see if they still have the Section 117 requirement. That is about making people more independent from a stigma that you receive. Oh, I'm Section 117, you have it through the entire period, and about making people independent. It is not about removing services, removing housing, removing the care for those that have that need. It is assessing whether people still have the need and ensuring that the joint reviews are undertaken with health and social care.
Thank you, John. Councillor Mundy.
I'm just putting my question together. Sorry, if Councillor Manley wants to go first, that's fine. Cool. Thank you, Chair. So I've got, if you wouldn't mind coming back around to me, I've got two questions. So if it's only fair. I think my first one was, I noticed there was a lot of cost cutting in relation to some of the miscellaneous supplies and services. I'd be really grateful if officers could expand further on that and just give us a flavour of what these type of schemes are.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I've got a small amount, I think about 30k. This is about sort of line by line review of budgets and looking at actuals over the last few years to see whether they're actually needed. We have an underspend in finance and digital, so it's prudent that we build on that and look at it. And it's the same with colleagues across the council. We encourage that as part of normal housekeeping.
Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to touch on the registrar services referred to, increasing the income through better utilisation of the available capacity. Are we sure that the existing staffing establishment at Morden Park House has got the capacity to deliver the increased utilisation? And also, if it hasn't, has the department considered the overspill in terms of weddings to go to the vestry hall automatically, which can provide the services now and is not being used at its fullest extent by any stretch of the imagination? Thanks.
So thanks for that question. So the registrar's service has gone from strength to strength over the last few years and has been outstripping its income targets. And our registrar's service, because we don't have a hospital in Merton, we don't have very many births and deaths to register here. So actually, most of what they do is marriages, and they've done a really good job, particularly since they brought the building, the gazebo into use for receptions and so on. They've done a really good job of expanding that business. In terms of the staffing establishment, there is very flexible, because whilst there's a core registrar service, we also have quite a large pool of casual registrars, which is usual actually, sessionals and sessional bar staff and so on to come in, and so we can kind of expand and contract the establishment in terms of how we need it. I think there's the service do feel confident that there is the additional capacity in the business to reach these additional income targets. But I do think that the point you make is a good one, that we have other venues which could be very popular for weddings, such as vestry and cannons and so on. The challenge for vestry hall, and I say this having run wedding venues in other boroughs for years, is the lack of parking actually, because one of the reasons the registry office is so popular is it has a decent sized car park, and it can be a bit of a challenge when you have a venue that doesn't have an obvious place to put all the guest cars. However, there are there are plenty of people for whom that wouldn't be a problem, and I think there is a real opportunity to market that further. So I would say it would be as well as rather than instead of.
Just follow up very briefly on that. Having worked very closely with the manager of the Vestry Hall, she has taken all of those into consideration and made agreements and arrangements with various venues in the locality to provide extra parking. And the diary is empty for the year and needs to be filled. So I think more marketing support would be of value, which will increase our revenue. Definitely. Thank you.
Absolutely, and we'll certainly bear that in mind because as I said, I think there's huge capacity for additional growth there.
Councillor Page first.
Thank you, Chair. I actually had another saving I wanted to ask about, but also to note on the section 117. I think it would be very difficult to to remove £450,000 of cost without, in some ways, reducing services. I mean, that's the only way you can really cut cost. But I want to ask about empowering residents through self-directed support and the direct payments, because I note that there's a proposed saving in the pack on that for I think £250,000 this year. There was a similar saving put forward in 24-25 for £100,000, of which 50,000 was delivered, and I think it's being delivered in an ongoing fashion. But the other 50k wasn't delivered back in 24-25. So now we have a £250,000 challenge going forward. So what's going to be done differently this time to ensure that whole £250,000 saving is delivered? And what will happen if residents do not want to move to direct payments?
Yes.
Sorry to sound like a broken record, but I'd just like to remind Councillor Page, we did have this discussion at a previous scrutiny, and I will ask John Morgan to provide the same answer he gave then. Thank you.
I am going to reiterate about the section 117 saving. This is not about reducing services or taking away services from people, but I can give you the example that I've given in the two scrutinies. If someone is in supported living, and they no longer need the supported living, we will help them move into general accommodation, whether that be rented or other forms of accommodation that helps them to be more independent. We won't take someone out of supported living and make them homeless, but it is about making people independent and reintegrating people back into the community. This is not about stopping services. Now, the second question you have is direct payments. Direct payments are a statutory duty that I must offer every resident that comes through the door of Merton, and they have a Care Act need. I statutorily must offer them a direct payment. We have seen a large increase in the number of people receiving direct payments. We have over 350 people receiving direct payments, and we have about just now 700 people have traditional care packages. The statistics and the outcomes for people that receive direct payments are better than those people that actually have a traditional service. Generally, people feel more empowered, they feel more confident in their care package, they feel as though they have more control over their lives. What we are doing, as I've said in the other two scrutinies, we're reviewing all of our paperwork. We're making it much easier for people to be able to have a direct payment with not so much paperwork to have to fill out. We are increasing our number of personal assistants so that people will be able to have personal assistants to help them, to commission to be able to help them with their care. And we're making the system slightly less bureaucratic.
Thank you. Councillor Rafema.
I have a question in relation to marketing and communication. It says that you are going to replace external services, design services with in-house staffing. Does that mean that the level of staffing has changed?
So one of the things that our new head of communications has done is created an in-house graphic design service. So previously, Merton outsourced all of their graphic design needs to agencies through a framework, and it was extremely expensive and quite difficult to keep control of the cost, and also quite hard to keep control of the quality as well. So we had a whole range of things being produced that had a very disparate look and feel, and lots of which weren't that good and were costing us a lot of money. The in-house service has been funded from within existing staffing budgets, but it does have it does recharge for its time across the council at a far lower hourly rate than external agencies would cost, which means that we've been able to quite confidently reduce our salaries budget, knowing on the basis of current consumption and really quite conservative estimates for use of the service next year, that some of that will be covered by the internal income.
Councillor Rees, then Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd like to draw a reference back to previous scrutiny meetings in the way that Councillor Alan Brittis is doing this evening. We have asked in a previous scrutiny meeting about the degree to which the fee increases, the increases in charges, some of which are really quite substantial, have been modelled, which is what I would expect to happen, to know whether, in fact, it is going to lead to increases in fees or whether, in fact, demand would decline as a result of increasing the prices. We've had an answer that says, yes, it has, and an answer from somebody else saying, I don't think it has, but we've had no evidence of the fact that any modelling has been done on these increases. Could we have the position outlined, please?
Yes, I'll ask Asad to come in on this one. So fees and charges, we're very careful to make sure that the taxpayer is not subsidizing services for other residents. We're mandated to apply an inflationary rise by inflation only on a number of statutory fees and charges. There are a number of businesses that we have to engage with, and so we're very careful to make sure that people get the best service for the best value, and also that the costs are related to the service itself. So I'll hand over to Asad.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd just add, obviously where there's an annual review of fees and charges, and that's good practice, and that is built into assumptions going forward. There is obviously modelling of not only the cost increases, but the demand and everything else. And you'll see that you'll see the impact of that in the saving put forward by environment, where there's been a significant review of fees and charges, which may not have been reviewed in a long time. So all of that modelling work is done and underpins that saving, as well as the assumptions going forward. And that's standard practice, and that's done every year, whether there's minimal uplift or whether there's a cost-based review.
Thank you. Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Chair. I'd be grateful if officers could briefly outline the MTFS assumptions relating to the impact of the cost of living on residents, and then sort of the direct support we may continue to offer, like the events we've been holding over the course of the period of the MTFS.
Thank you, Councillor. So there is obviously a significant programme of support that this council has run. So for the last number of years, we set up a fund to really impact the cost of living. We also supplement money we receive from central government, around half, and school vouchers and school meals during holidays. So there is a significant amount of investment from our resources. Of course, we do an assessment of all our sort of fees and charges around lots of areas around equality, but no, absolutely, there's been a significant amount of investment over the MTFS period around putting forward schemes which will impact cost of living. We've also got things like the council tax support scheme, which is one of the most significantly generous schemes in the country, as well as a low council tax base comparatively to lots of authorities in the national average.
Thanks, Asa. Councillor Aki Eugenia.
Thank you, Chair. Temporary accommodation, really. Just want to say that the fact that the council's plan is clearly working, and the temporary accommodation placement and discharge have stabilised, highlights the effects to tackling our local housing crisis. Can you just give me a little outline on what you plan to do to increase that sort of level of good work?
Thank you, Chair. We have the advantage here of not only having the Executive Director, but Pippa Hack, who is leading our brilliant delivery unit and is responsible for the separate report on this agenda on temporary accommodation. And it really demonstrates how the delivery unit, scrutinised on a regular basis by myself, by Jeremy Smalley as the Executive Director, by the leader, and by the Chief Executive, has really performed wonderfully well. They based their approaches on the Prime Minister's delivery unit and how that has been successful across various agencies and departments. And as we all know, we face an immense crisis in London, primarily driven by evictions from private rented property, so that the number of households we have had to find temporary accommodation for has gone right up in recent years. And we had this overspend of £7 million. And there are about 60 different actions in 6 different courses of work that the delivery unit has picked up. And just in summary, they're looking at the following. There being fewer temporary accommodation placements, more discharges from temporary accommodation, how we can use less spot purchased temporary accommodation because that is extremely expensive, and how we can have cheaper spot purchase temporary accommodation, and how we can recover more housing benefits. So they are crucial actions. And the 6th field is how we can increase supply. And we're currently negotiating contracts around 27 individual properties to bring in, which would be used for temporary accommodation. But we also have a very significant housing programme now of, I think, 248 properties that we're building. And that will take households from the housing register, but some of those are in temporary accommodation. So building that accommodation will play a very important role in reducing the cost of temporary accommodation. But I fear I may tread on toes of our brilliant unit. I don't know if either Jeremy as the Executive Director or Pippa leading the unit will wish to comment further.
Well, we are going to come on to that. Shall we save you all? Sorry, Councillor Judge, but maybe we'll save you because you've got your own. No, it is, and I want to give them the adequate time they deserve. So we'll come back, but we'll finish off with the last 3 questions. Councillor Oliver, Councillor Rees, and Councillor Page. Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. These are just specific questions about 2, if I may, savings in the Children, Lifelong Learning and Families section. And to preempt what Councillor Alan Brittis is almost certainly going to say, these have been discussed already at the panels, but the members of those panels that I've spoken to are not entirely satisfied by the responses, so it seems entirely appropriate to use this forum to bring them up for clarification. So the first one is number 3 in the savings. This is the 165k, which, from my reading of it, is that we're going to withdraw some funding that we have previously made, and hope that, but it's not confirmed that, this funding will be replaced by the ICB. Rather strangely, the Equalities Impact Assessment says there's a positive impact. I can't see how this could possibly yield to give rise to a positive impact. presumably at best neutral if the funding is replaced. But what is the situation? Do we know if this funding is going to be replaced? If it's not going to be replaced, then presumably something is going to have to go. So 165k has to be saved, and that's going to have some impact on somebody. So can we have a bit of clarification on that?
Would you like to answer that?
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. And in the last two scrutinies, CLLF does appreciate the opportunity to revisit this and make sure we're articulating with clarity why this savings is one that we're confident about putting forward. So the negotiations around sharing the responsibility for meeting the SEMH needs and the mental health support for children in Merton have progressed. The progress is really trying to ensure that the grant that is provided to CAMS, our GESH service, is that they meet the needs of these children and that it does not come from the general fund in its simplest fashion. It is not that the needs won't be met, it is that we want to put the responsibility for meeting the needs back with our CAMS service, and those negotiations commenced last week, and we will continue to finalise those negotiations, and they accept these children, our children, are their responsibility. So we're not at the stage to say anything's been signed on the dotted line, but we are not getting any resistance. I really do hope that gives the answer that you are expecting.
Well, thank you for that explanation, but it's still worrying that that hasn't been concluded yet. And if you are unable to reach that conclusion, then presumably this saving would not go ahead. Am I right?
Have you got anything to add, Bev? Oh, sorry, Asad.
The only thing I'd add to sort of Bev's answer is the answer I gave at the panel. I think that there is a threshold for savings that are put forward, and you know that there is always going to be an element of delivery of savings. So these are plans to deliver savings, and once they reach that threshold, based on statutory duties and everything else, I think we are confident that this will be delivered. As with any savings where things can't be delivered, it is expected by me of compensatory savings, and against a budget of sort of a third of the council, we believe that they can find that. But as I say, it's been put forward on the basis of comfort that it can be delivered.
Thanks, Asad. Councillor Rees.
Sorry, just have a second question. That was the first one. The
Well,
second one, if I may. Or
very quickly.
That could be
Very
later.
quickly.
The second one, I'm not picking on you, Bev. This is also in your area. And this has also been discussed at panels, but again, a little bit of confusion about it, which we wanted to clarify. This is the thing about the children's social care and family wellbeing teams. I understand that you're receiving a grant of 800,000 pounds on a one-off basis, and that this will generate on a permanent basis a 500,000+ saving per year in perpetuity. So again, that seems like an amazing result. In fact, we probably should have done that ourselves without waiting to be given the money, because the payback is enormous. But just to clarify that is in fact possible, that we're receiving an 800k grant and we can deliver on the strength of that a 500k saving in perpetuity.
So thank you.
I should open by just with a degree of humility. I see that we have caused some confusion. The £800 refers to the first tranche of savings. I'm not going to be the second. We have now received confirmation of the funding for 3 years for implementation of the Family First Partnership Programme. So the £800 referred to was a point in time to give some confidence that the grant has been received by Merton, and now more recently in the last week we've had written confirmation of the grant for the next 3 years to deliver a major transformation of child protection system in Merton and across the country. And so on that basis, we are confident that the model that is being rolled out through the DFE is what we want. We want children to stay with their families. We want children to be supported at the earliest point that an issue has been identified. We do not want them coming into statutory services and then we fracture the ability for them to return to their families. And so we believe that in retilting the system, putting more emphasis to prevention, that we can achieve that. And Merton is fortunate, the partnership is strong, and unlike other local authorities, we did not strip out through austerity the investment in our family hubs and our early intervention service. So we have a good foundation to build on. I do hope that provides the assurance.
Well, I'm very grateful to the executive director for that, and that is very reassuring. And I would just urge you to update the text in the document before Budget Council.
And thank you for pointing that out. And that's why I started with some humility.
Thank you. Glad we cleared that up. Councillor Rees.
Yes, so I was going to ask a question about temporary accommodations, and I think we're taking that later. So I'll.
Yes, I had one final one around the savings, or I think it's actually increase in income around the public realm, the 500k in additional sort of penalty charge notices income that the council seeks to generate. In calculating that £500,000 figure, has the have officers and cabinet members been looking at location of cameras by ward, or how have they managed to get to sort of £500,000 in additional charges? And is there a target ward breakdown or target street breakdown for that?
Thanks. Please go ahead, Donna.
Thank you, Councillor, for that question. The answer is that we have 120 locations across the borough that have either ANPR cameras or have potential to be a location for an ANPR camera. And what we've done is we've looked across a number of London boroughs to understand how they are using and working to improve compliance with regulation. And then we have taken an estimation from other boroughs such as Greenwich, Kingston, Sutton, other boroughs around us that we feel that we can compare to, and we've taken a percentage of those, quite a conservative percentage, and applied that to this situation. And what we will be doing over the course of 26, 27 is seeking to understand more effectively how we improve compliance and how we move our ANPR assets to make sure that we generate the level of compliance we're seeking, but also whether or not this level of PCNs is sustainable. So that's essentially what we're doing. It may well turn out to be higher, but we've taken a conservative view at this point to ensure that we're not over-egging the savings. Thank you.
Thanks, Donald. I think Councillor Page has got something else.
That was very helpful. Thank you. And could you describe what type of things these cameras are detecting? Is this speeding or parking or?
Well, yes, it's a combination of things. So it can be yellow boxes on the highway. It can be no right-hand turn junctions. It can be bus lanes. It can be incidences where existing regulations are in place. So it's not about new regulation. It's about existing regulation, but it's ensuring that there is compliance with regulation where, for example, dangerous behaviours have been exhibited and we want to try and reinforce safety on the highway.
Thank you. Yeah, school streets. Thank you, Donna. Right. I think that's finished up. We've had quite an extensive round of questions there. Do we have any recommendations for Cabinet? Are we happy to put that forward? Thank you. Right. With no further ado.
I have a suggestion, and that is that given that we haven't got a balanced budget yet, could Cabinet advise us at the earliest possible opportunity of how that gap is to be bridged?
That's going to come up in the council, budget council, but yeah, we'll be covering it.
Yeah, we'd be happy to commit to do that at Cabinet before budget, and the papers will be published.
Thank you. Right, just a slight change here. Instead of going straight to temporary accommodation, we'll just do item 6 so that we can let the directors go, and then we'll spend the time with temporary accommodation. So item 6, scrutiny of the business plan. Are there any references? No. Right. In that case, Those that aren't staying for temporary accommodation, thank you for coming and good night. Now we'll come on to item 5, temporary accommodation. Thank you for being patient, Jeremy. If you would like to introduce the report, please.
To add to my previous remarks, I would commend this as a model of how council should deal with very significant and unexpected issues. And this has been unexpected in the way it's blown up over the last 3 to 4 years. And instead of trying to deal with it in a silo way, it is the corporate element of the council that has been involved. And that's as it should be, because the ramifications are certainly corporate. The corporates in financial terms, but they also relate, for instance, to the supply of housing. So I think that is done very well. And we have, I've mentioned the brilliant delivery unit we have, but we also have people who deliver. And I should mention Elliot Brunson and his team, because where there is success here, it is being delivered by Elliot's team, and I don't think that should be forgotten. But I'd invite Jeremy and Pippa to present.
Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I think that's a really good place to start, that this is really important in driving systemic change across the whole council. And we'll articulate a little bit more about how that is taking place. And I do also want to put on record my backing for Councillor Judge's point about Elliot and his team and the amount of work that they have done. And fundamentally, the delivery unit has given us extra capacity and attention. And as a service, we found that really beneficial. And we've got a really strong working relationship to deliver these changes. So the first thing I'd say is this is a real London-wide problem. Temporary accommodation and the rise in demand for services for temporary accommodation is unprecedented, and it really is a housing crisis. And the housing crisis is complex and multifaceted. And Merton is still and remains one of the lowest in London. However, that's not to say that we should be complacent, because there are still 750 families or residents in temporary accommodation, and that's a real challenge, and that's a tragedy for those people. And it's something we as a team are really keen to try and do something about. Of course, the other problem is that it costs the council a lot of money to place people in temporary accommodation, and that's not sustainable long term for any council. And a number of councils are signalling real concerns about their financial viability as a result of temporary accommodation. And thankfully, we're not in that situation due to a number of key decisions and indeed this programme. And the report outlines there's been a real significant increase in demand. So this is a demand and a supply side problem. And it's not just the numbers of people coming in the door that we've experienced an increase in demand. It is also that the cost of the accommodation for those individuals has gone up significantly, about fourfold. And so hence why there is such significant budget pressure. And what we've done collectively is to come up with a delivery plan for how we're going to manage and reduce costs to the council. And this is outlined in some detail in the report, and Councillor Judge referred to it earlier. And there are a number of demand side measures, and there are a number of supply side measures, including, as Councillor Judge says, our acquisition for temporary accommodation, but also our going live with the first council homes in a generation, and the recent cabinet decision to acquire some stock to go into the housing revenue account when it opens, which are really positive. But we recognise supply is a long-term challenge and solution. So lots of other things on the demand side. And in the paper is the action plan, and I just wanted to stress the cross-council nature of this. So what happens at the moment is the council is subsidising temporary accommodation. And we intend to do more to reduce the amount of subsidy the council has to put into this by reclaiming more of the housing benefit from central government. It affects our finance colleagues who work in housing benefit. It also affects our finance colleagues in debt recovery, because there are debts in contributions from some tenants. It affects our customer services. We have done an end-to-end assessment of how people experience the housing service and how they get help, and we will be bringing forward measures to triage more effectively, both online, digitally, and also in the civic centre and other places where referrals come from. And we are working with digital colleagues across the council to make sure that we are getting accurate data, which enables us to be able to pinpoint where we've got particular cost pressures and arrest those declines. So that's a very quick overview, but I don't know whether anyone from the delivery unit wants to say anything. Do you want to say anything, Pippa?
Thank you. Sorry, it's my first time in the chamber. So I think the other thing just to mention is the amount of grip that we've got in terms of monitoring the delivery plan. So we've put in place governance where we'll have weekly meetings twice a week with Elliot Service, as well as a weekly meeting with the executive director, and then a monthly meeting with the council cabinet member, the leader, Hannah and Jeremy. So we're making sure that in a very volatile environment, particularly around the availability of supply of private sector homes, we're able to track and report any risks or achievements, if you like, in relation to managing the whole delivery plan. So I just want to reassure you that this isn't something that sort of sits on a shelf. It's something that is being very actively focused upon in order to ensure that we have successful delivery.
Thanks, Pippa, and thanks, Jeremy. It was a very good introduction to the report. Just before, Councillor Judge mentioned it, but could you tell me how landlord behaviour is changing with the forthcoming Renters' Rights Act and what the council is doing and will be doing? Because certainly my day job is private property. So I know there are landlords getting out of it, and I just wanted to know your thought. I know you're aware of it, but it'd be good to get it out. Thank you.
It's somewhat difficult to predict what the future looks like there at the moment. What we have seen is that there's been increases in private sector evictions. You know, I mean, it started off after COVID, and it wouldn't have been caused by the Renters' Rights Bill there. But in more recent times, we do know landlords essentially have been leaving the business. But there are many more left behind, and we have a twice yearly landlords forum where we engage with landlords and you know, one of the reasons we do that is to see what their view is. We also provide them with training at those landlord forums, and we also speak to them about whether they'll work with the council as well. You know, certainly some of the smaller landlords may feel reluctant to stay in, but there are larger, more corporate landlords that appear to be coming on board. We don't know what it's going to look like after May, in particular, when Section 21s are no longer being able to be used. And that is the biggest cause of homelessness in the UK and in Merton. So on one hand, there's potentially some positive news there for us. On the other hand, you'll perhaps see a change in behaviour from some landlords. There'll be increased use of something called Section 8, which is where landlords ask tenants to leave for breach of tenancy, typically rent arrears and things like that. Now, I think we would expect to see that. That's legitimate. Equally, you may see some increase in less legitimate behaviours from landlords as well. And, you know, the council will have an increased enforcement role around that. But our private sector team are doing more business with landlords than ever before. We have attracted more and more that are coming to us. So I'm cautiously optimistic at the moment, but as I say, it's difficult to say what the sort of future headwinds will be, other than we will continue to engage with landlords all along the way, because you know they're a major part of the council meeting housing need in the borough.
Thank you. Very honest answer. Councillor Manley first, then Councillor Mundy.
Thank you so much. And I'm delighted to see that we are getting a grip of the situation and that we are tightening up on the governance of the whole system and really trying to deliver, because clearly it's been a major stressor. And my hope is that with the new Tenants' Rights Act, that actually there may be a reduction somewhat that we might be able to register. But a thought occurs to me, and I wonder if I'm barking up the wrong tree here, but it's just an idea. I receive many complaints from residents in blocks like Clarion blocks, etc., where Clarion have voids that go on for far too long, and whether those could be identified as potential temporary situations where someone's maybe sort of halfway through somewhere, where there's a register that you could actually work hand in hand with these social housing groups, and have maybe a closer working relationship with groups like Mitcham Garden Village, where marvelous social landlord, but voids can be there for a number of months for elderly people that could release a family home. So that's one suggestion. And the other thing is, I know we're building the housing. That's fantastic. And of course, I'm a huge supporter of that. But are we looking at potential creation of further temporary housing that we could build that may be swifter to engage with? For example, in my ward, we have Hall Place, which I'm sure you're very familiar with, which not everyone loves. But is there an argument that in the long term, and even in the short term, if we were to identify further buildings that could be easily adapted or brought up to scratch for temporary housing, that we would be reducing our costs? So just some feedback, really.
Thank you very much for those very helpful suggestions, Councillor Manley. And on the first point about voids, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that we as a service do, and indeed Councillor Judge and the leader have both made representations to our registered provider partners about reducing what's known as the key-to-key period for voids, and making sure that those voids are offered to the housing service here at Merton. We've had mixed success. It goes in phases. It's lumpy. So this week we've had more approach the service, but that follows a period where there weren't enough. And members who held RPs to some kind of account last week will know that they heard loud and clear the council's desire that registered providers need to be partners in solving this problem. So we keep pressing on that point, and we'll be happy to bring updates to make sure we are getting those voids. On the building adaptation and other buildings for temporary accommodation, absolutely, we've got to try every single thing that we can, and where we've got buildings that we can repurpose, or we could acquire buildings that could be repurposed, then we must look at that. Thank you.
Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is, a very well thought out paper, and welcome it coming in your efforts you put into it. One of the assumptions underpinning it is the level of private sector landlords, and obviously your register of private sector landlords, which I hope that we can get government support now to roll across the borough if appropriate. But I was just inquiring, what are your plans to improve the data quality of that and to expand it further? I know there are some landlords who aren't yet registered through some casework that we work with together, and it's not through your own fault trying. So how can you make sure that your data and assumptions are robust as possible so that you can understand this proposal works as best as it can be?
I mean, it's set out in the Renters' Writers' Act to have a register of landlords. They're not there yet, and some of the details yet to be laid out. I mean, we do have our own local register of private landlords, and of course we have selective and additional licensing, which is gradually building much better data in Merton. So going forward, we'll have to see what the government proposals are to put all of that together. But it is a really important part of what we do. There's no doubt about that, and we're keen, both from an engagement point of view as well as an enforcement point of view, to know who we're dealing with, and how the council can best liaise with them. But there's still quite a lot of work coming from central government about how all of that's going to work at the moment.
Councillor Rees.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got some comments to make on the demand side and the supply side. I think it was a very bold administration that saw the trends, that saw the demand for temporary accommodation going up and up and up and up, and then said, for this year, no, we don't think it's going to go up anymore. We think it's going to level off. We thought, I think that might go up. And indeed, it's £7 million overspent. I think the lack of focus on new house builds, so the announcement some time ago now, 75 new homes, still not there. The demand has doubled since that announcement was made about new homes. So the situation is substantially worse now. And the question that Councillor Manley's asked about what proportion of the new homes that are being built might contribute to reducing the temporary accommodation costs was, I think, a good question. But I've got a follow-up question about this very helpful table. Well, it could have been very helpful. 4.59. Those of us who are serious about scrutiny, we love tables. We love some numbers. But this could have been so much more helpful. So we've got a column, 2025-26 targets. We don't have the actuals, so we've no idea what actually was delivered against those targets or where we are versus those targets. Then we've got targets for next year and some specification of how much saving might result. But the top 3 rows just have 21 acquisitions, 31 per month. There's no data about what the savings might be from that achievement. So it was nearly very helpful, but not helpful enough, I'm afraid.
Right. So I think that was more of a statement than a question, but if anyone would like to answer that, Councillor Judge.
There's always a danger in presenting things as the glass is half empty, because in this case, the glass is more than half full in terms of the work we are doing. We have not built council homes for a generation in Merton. We didn't have any officers with experience or capacity in building council homes, and that is the case across most local authorities, where local authorities at one time used to have very substantial staffs of architects, of quantity surveyors, of civil engineers. Local government has become denuded of such professionals. So the first issue we have to address when we start to build homes is to develop our own capacity. And that does take some time. You can't build homes immediately. I mean, one of the sayings in the building game is that architecture is slow, right? So it is slow. It can't be done immediately. And if it's done immediately, it's probably poor, shoddy, and will have to come down after some time. But we do have a very substantial housing programme, 75, going to be delivered directly. 146 in partnership with Berkeley Homes, one of the better developers in the country, actually develop on the whole very high quality homes. We're buying 27 homes from the market, and we will have more to come. We will be presenting a housing business plan with our future plans for homes. So the homes we are building now are just the start, and we must continue beyond that. The glass is also half empty in terms of the forecast, and I'd invite Jeremy and Pippa perhaps to address or endeavour to address some of the critique that Councillor Rees has asked.
Yeah, thank you. I think on the issue of forecasting numbers in a year and therefore making budget provision, it's incredibly difficult. And at this time last year, we were reasonably confident that we would be able to level off. And in fact, we've done very well with the discharges, but we still had increased in demand. I'm always really nervous at advising members about setting a budget increase for something which we don't want to bake in as a permanent figure. What we have to do is really drive down costs and stay within budget, and hence why there is this programme. And I think I hear your point about how are all these listed actions going to result in savings, and I think we can come back with some more information about that, because we are doing some work forecasting when will we get these savings and how much will those savings be, and that's an active piece of work. And as Pippa explained, we are working on this very live with live data, so we're getting more refined. But thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy. It was a good question, Tony, and thank you for your answer. And that'll be good if we can have that at some time in the future. And I have to say, I think it's more half full than half empty. This has been talked about quite a bit in my 12 years as a councillor, and I've watched it gather momentum in the last couple of years. And yeah, I don't want to tempt fate. It's going the right way. So no, well done. Councillor Oliver, then Councillor Johnston, then you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll try and make it one question, but it's got A, B, C, and D. So maybe if you can try and remember them. So the first thing is that I think reading your paper, you're going to take on some extra staff. So my question would be how many, how much, and why isn't it in the budget? The second question would be Hall Place. It seems that you've discovered that we have a 10-year lease on Hall Place. When did you discover that? And why haven't we been claiming the full amount of housing benefit for longer? The third thing is generally a bit like my neighbour's comments. It seems to have taken us an awful long time to actually do anything about this. I pay tribute to the executive director. I think if he wasn't here, we would still not have done anything because nothing was happening before he arrived. And also to Elliot and his team, who every time I've had anything to do with this team, they've been incredibly helpful. And finally, one bit of anecdotal feedback, and that is in some buildings, one particularly tall building I can think of, residents are being given money to leave. And I think the idea is that the landlord would then get new tenants at higher rents to replace them with the prospect of the Rental Reform Act coming in. So I don't know if that's a general thing or if that's just a particular thing to a particular location, but that was quite alarming when people were telling me about that. So there you go.
Yeah, no, great. Thank you very much for the questions and comments. So yes, there are going to be more staff into the housing service, and some of that is going to come from within my Directorate of Housing and Sustainable Development. So I will be bringing forward a reorganisation, and there will be some parts of the Directorate that will have less staff, and there will be more staff going into the housing service. And I should say, you know, one of the things that was really apparent for me on arrival was that we've had this increase in demand, and yet the housing service had stayed relatively the same. And so it's really important for me to make sure that Elliot and the team have got the resources they need to deliver. And again, in due course, we can talk more about how that structure looks and how it's going to be funded. In terms of Hall Place, we always knew it had a 10-year lease. The issue here was clarifying legal advice about what rental level we could charge. So it's a bit complicated, this, so forgive me. But if typically on a property that the council places somebody in temporary accommodation, the council will often start paying the rent, and then we claim back housing benefit, and the housing benefit level is set at 80% of 2011 market, 80% of 2011 market rent. And what we have taken legal advice, and Sharon and Elliot have commissioned some council advice, is that where we have either ownership, hence why we're really pleased that Cabinet approved the approval to go and buy some properties, and anything with a 10-year plus lease, we can claim what's known as local housing allowance 2024 rate. So that means that the amount of subsidy that the council is putting in is significantly less. Hence why we're really keen to get into some longer lease arrangements and some acquisitions. It's not that we didn't know it had the 10-year lease, it was the legal question about what rent we could reclaim. Thank you.
Thanks for clearing that up. Councillor Johnston.
Yeah, I originally wanted to ask my question following up on yours, Chair, because I was also interested in the Renters' Right Act, and I know, Elliot, you can't predict the future, and I can see that with the behavioural change, hopefully we'll see fewer numbers in of people getting evicted through the ending of no-fault evictions. And I just wondered, in the modelling we can see in our paper, has that been taken into account, or is that because it's difficult to predict the future, we're almost excluding that and approaching taking a wait and see approach to see whether it has an impact, or we've tried to model that and it is reflected in the model, if that makes sense?
It's something that we've got in mind for it. I mean, obviously, it mentions in the paper that we're going to have a triage service, but for those of us that have been in the housing game for a very long time, it kind of takes us back to a position that we were in, I guess, the late 90s or even 80s, depending on how far you want to go back in terms of security of tenure for people. So it's going to move us back to a more traditional model of certainly of housing advice, where you could enforce people's rights rather than saying, "Oh, I can't do anything about that. I need to find them somewhere else to live." I think there will still be an element of both, but it does mean that we're going to invest in training on staff, because people need to be, customers need to be made aware of what their rights are. Staff will need to be very clear on what the legal framework is and the new legal framework that's coming in. So it will change the way in which we provide that frontline service to people, but it's something we're very much keeping an eye on, and we're looking at emerging trends and so on to see how we can adapt the service accordingly.
Councillor Butcher.
Thank you, Chair. I noted that we have a higher rate of prevention of people falling into homelessness than the London average. Just wondered if you could tell us what the practices were that were successful, what we're doing well in that regard, and why that might be. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, the first point to say is that really every case should be treated as preventable. I mean, there's now a legal responsibility to do that, but it was always the case for Merton Council that the first point was, what can we do to avoid someone becoming homeless? So there's essentially two approaches to it. You either enable to keep someone to stay where they are, assuming it's safe for them to do so, or you find them somewhere else in the meantime. So, for example, if someone had fallen into rent arrears in the social or the private housing sector, and that could happen for a whole host of different reasons, someone's partner could leave them, they could become ill. Sometimes it's possible to make what's called a homelessness prevention payment, because to avoid someone being evicted, whilst perhaps at the same time negotiating with the landlord alongside that. For victims of domestic abuse, you may enable somebody to increase security measures at the home through something called the sanctuary scheme, which means, again, assuming it's safe for them to stay there, that they don't end up going into temporary accommodation as a consequence of that. We've mentioned that we work with private sector landlords to try and find alternative homes before somebody actually becomes homeless and before someone needs to go into temporary accommodation. And we also do a lot of mediation between family evictions, and that's the second highest type of homelessness in the UK and in Merton as well. So we do have a process on the council's housing register where we can give someone a higher priority, but on the basis that they continue to stay where they are. Or equally, sometimes, particularly for younger people, there's some mediation that you can do when there's been genuine family breakdown, and you can, particularly for 16 and 17-year-olds, and we work very closely with our colleagues in children's social care around that. So there's a whole host of things. There's no one size fits all in prevention, and officers are encouraged to think on their feet and try and address what the core problem is in order to avoid someone becoming homeless.
Thanks, Councillor Page.
Thank you. I just want to start by echoing Councillor Oliver's point that the housing team are consistently extremely helpful team, and I'm very grateful for the service that you provide. That said, I mean, going from 350 households in temporary accommodation in 2022 to over 745 at the moment over the course of this administration. It doesn't feel like success. Never mind who is in charge of the council before this, the current administration. But I guess my question is, given temporary accommodation is the council's sort of highest marginal cost for housing, will you look at using the 75 council houses as a more flexible resource? For example, using them for emergency short-term housing rather than sort of long-term tenancies?
So just on that latter point first, it's unlikely that we'll use the 75 for temporary accommodation. They are intended to be for social rent. The council's secured over £20 million of GLA grant funding for the purpose of these council homes and for them being social rent. Where there is some glimmer of hope in terms of temporary accommodation is that there are some people in temporary accommodation who are also on the housing waiting list. So there will be a mixed approach in terms of some of those who are in temporary accommodation and on the housing waiting list. Clearly, there is a cost benefit analysis of them moving into a permanent social home. So we're again with the data looking at how we can have the biggest impact. I think in respect of the point about the numbers, I think the rate of growth across London is huge, and those figures you quote about Merton are still really difficult for Merton and for each of those individuals, but everybody is really struggling with this problem. There is such a huge increase in demand, and I think we're doing everything we can, as Elliot has outlined, in terms of prevention, so that we're minimising the amount of impact it's having at the beginning, and we are trying to address supply and, in the meantime, look at demand as well. And I'd just like to thank all members for supporting the housing colleagues, because they do an incredible job in very difficult circumstances. So your thanks is much appreciated.
Councillor Pate, do you just want to come back one then Councillor Manley, and that'll be it.
So that was helpful information about the 75. I wondered if there's other ability to sort of, for the council to own directly temporary accommodation, because obviously people are made homeless at it's at the most vulnerable point, and if they could be moved into housing that was controlled directly by the council, then of course we know it was secure, we'd know it was safe, rather than trying to find that marginal bit of private accommodation on the market, which is likely the other end of the scale in terms of quality than what we could maybe provide if we owned directly.
That's a good point. Thank you very much. And the council, the cabinet made a decision in June last year to allocate 13 million of capital, which we have secured 7 million of government funding as match, and we will complete on 27 properties this financial year, which the council will hold in its general fund, and it will be specifically for the use of temporary accommodation. That helps in terms of quality standards, and it also, as I outlined before, enables us to reclaim from government local housing allowance 2024 rate, so it reduces the amount of subsidy. We have also submitted an expression of interest to MHCLG for what's known as LAF4, that's Local Authority Housing Fund 4. And we've had a nominal allocation, which will enable us, with matched capital, which has also been approved as part of the November cabinet paper on housing, to acquire up to an additional 65. So we will get to a position where the council has a number of properties which it can control directly, and offer good quality accommodation in borough for people in temporary accommodation. Thank you.
Councillor Manley.
Yeah, quality control is always fascinating to me, because and I won't cite the name of the person, but I had a case a couple of years ago whereby a young lady was put into temporary accommodation with her 4-year-old son, and unfortunately the condition of the room within the house, it was a house of multiple occupation, was so disgusting and so unsafe. I think she lasted 3 days. It was particularly bad and unsafe, and yet we were still paying. She did contact the council to say, how do I get, a decent lock on my door? And she was told to refer directly to the landlord, who paid no attention to her, and the condition was pretty astonishingly bad, and we were paying for this. So I'm just wondering, I don't need the case to be looked at, this one, but I'm wondering what quality control we do have and how responsive we are to someone saying, look, this is, I can't live in this is disgusting and unsafe.
Well, obviously, the first thing I would say that's clearly not acceptable. I mean, when the council goes out to the providers of temporary accommodation, we do so on the basis that it should meet all the basic requirements, and there are, as part of our processes, some checks at the outset in terms of gas and electric safety certificates and things like that. It is the case that people can report issues to us. We do encourage them to go to the provider as well, but experience tells us that if someone comes to us, we will take it up with the provider. We've also got a set of officers that go out and visit properties to inspect them, and we've increased the resource in that area in recent times. And we're also part of something called Setting the Standard, which is a London-wide inspection regime, which at the moment covers studio flats and one beds, and there are qualified environmental health officers that go around and inspect that and give ratings and then feedback to the authority on it. But it is an area that we're very conscious of, and equally that it wouldn't be just a Merton issue. I think you'll probably see in times ahead that there'll be further regulation coming around temporary accommodation as well, and that's something that we would clearly welcome. And it is an area that we want to make sure that we're doing more and more in to ensure the accommodation that we provide for people does meet their needs, because we have a legal and moral responsibility to do so.
Thank you, Elliot. And our last question, Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. To the Director, we've heard a lot about demand tonight. Could we have a little bit of background on the profile and where this demand is coming from?
Yeah. Do you want to talk through some of the granularity of that, Elliot?
Okay. As I said, the biggest cause of homelessness has been end of assured short hold tenancy. So that has by far dwarfed everything else. And the reasons for that, I think you can trace it back to the pandemic when there was a moratorium on evictions, which was necessary at the time, but then that led to lots of cases at the end of the pandemic being bogged down in the courts. And sometimes it was taking landlords anything from a year or longer to evict people. And then essentially we had a huge number of cases come through at the same time. So that was by far the biggest reason for it. It's always been the case that family and friend eviction makes up the next biggest group. And if you go back probably 15 years, it would have been the biggest group. And, the reasons for that are complex in terms of households changing, households growing, family breakdown, all of those sort of things. Other than that, domestic abuse in particular has risen in recent times. Now, the Domestic Abuse Act in 2021 widened the council's responsibilities that relate to people fleeing domestic abuse. And that's meant that there's been more single people coming to us who previously hadn't been entitled to services and who now are. So that's probably the third biggest group coming through, and that presents quite a challenge both in terms of assessment and also provision of accommodation from people from there. So those are the three biggest groups making up homelessness. Other than that, there are smaller groups after that, but I'm happy to answer or any more questions along those lines.
Thank you, Elliot, and thank you for some very good questions. Thank you, team, Jeremy. It's nice to hear positive comments coming your way. Very well deserved as well. I echo those as well. So long may it continue. Right, thank you. And thank you for coming tonight. Item 7, the work programme. Our next meeting's on the 8th of March. Our living wage champion hasn't submitted an update, which we said we'd do, has he, Billy? Yeah, until then. Okay, right. If I don't think there's anything else. Does anyone want? Is the work program agreed? Does anyone want to add anything to it? If we can. No, right. That's agreed. Okay. Well, I'll say thank you, everybody, and good night. Have a safe journey home.